From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts, James and Zach.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Digital Banter. As always, I'm Zach. With me, of course, is my co-host James.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, and with us today, we were kind of alluding to this last week. We're kind of having a little bit more of a roundtable this time, and I'll get into the topic here in a moment, but I want to introduce them first. So first and foremost, with Dragon 360, we have Jay coming to the podcast for the first time.
How's it going, everybody?
Wow, enthusiastic. I love it. And next we have Daniel. He's also from Dragon 360. So this is a Dragon 360 internal guest. Two guests, I should say.
Let's get it. Today we brought on the Google experts because as Zach alluded to, the topic of conversation today is going to be heavily focused on Google automation, what it means for us, and what the future looks like.
And maybe even to sum it up, I mean, this could turn into just, I guess, disclosure. This may turn into a rant. This could turn into a vent session. This could turn into a hate party, dumpster fire conversation, all of it. Ultimately, we kind of have some key topics we really wanted to hit, but a lot of these things allude to almost a rabbit hole of a conversation of what could happen next, what is happening right now. And I think the biggest aspect, of Google and where Google is going is the automation. And it's almost as if automation is the only future of Google. I would love, Daniel or Jay to give your experience on and share your insights and feelings on just how Google is pushing automation so hard right now.
I don't know if right now is necessarily, they've been pushing it, I would say, for the last, 2 years, 3 years, it feels like.
For sure. Absolutely. One of the biggest issues, right, and this is one that we came across, was they're almost auto-applying recommendations. Before, you had to go in physically and say, hey, I want this or I don't want this, dismiss it, whatever it is, give a reason why you want to dismiss it. And now it's almost like they're auto-applying recommendations. On this front, James, Jay, or Daniel, how is this affecting campaigns on a daily basis that you've noticed, or even on a monthly, quarterly basis?
Yeah, I'd say, unfortunately, to your point, a lot of this, and Daniel, you too, a lot of this started coming out 2-3 years ago, and I'd kind of align it with when they made a big change to editor, too. I think it was back in 2017. Feel free to check me on that. But with that, obviously some of the settings with campaigns, like building net new campaigns versus tweaking things, got tweaked, turned for the worse. But yeah, something that we've been noticing a lot across the board, and unfortunately, they're things that you don't always spot until after the fact, are some of these changes not changes, but settings that'll be automatically applied to campaigns that you have to manually go in and remember to shut off after building out the campaign. You alluded to the auto apply stuff before. That's actually, I would say, a good feature. It's still technically in beta, I think. If you were to navigate through a Google Ads account, you'd be able to go to the recommendations tab, click auto apply, and then you see all of the things that are checked off there. And you obviously have the option to either check them on, check them off, depending on your client, your business, what makes sense. But definitely, for the most part, we feel a lot of these don't make sense.
In what ways?
There's tons of.
In what ways
right.
don't they make sense?
Yeah, there's tons of examples of the specific features. I won't get into each, every single auto apply feature that's there, but it goes from anything to automatically setting target CPAs, automatically adjusting your bids for you, which isn't a huge deal in some cases, but again, it depends on what you're trying to do. But all the way down to building out new ads for you, automatically applying responsive search ads without you even reviewing them. And I know Daniel and I complain about this quite a bit, just what those auto apply features actually entail. When it comes to ad copy, you need things to be pretty controlled, I feel like, especially obviously in our space.
Yep.
All of us here are working with B2B clients. We may have a few B2C clients here and there, but we know, most of our clients are pretty strict when it comes to the copy that we're writing and what that actually looks like. So,
yeah, I've seen this get like super hectic with any client that has like a heavy compliance present. The financial space is a huge one for us. Anything that's pharmaceutical or medical based, even if it's just like medical technology. The future of automation is making it much less easy to kind of implement what our clients are looking for, and it can be frustrating, especially when compliance is involved, because settings get turned on, nobody knows about it. I mean, we do know about it for the most part, like rather quickly, but they're also trying to hide stuff, which can be frustrating.
Absolutely. I think, Daniel, you come from a very unique background in the Google space that I wouldn't say very few, but not a whole lot of people in our industry kind of start where you started on this front, or at least got a lot of experience. And so, you kind of alluded this a lot, and a lot of this automation and Google doing things in the background, right? You have these Google reps that reach out to you and they're saying, hey, yeah, expanded text ads don't do this, but hey, we're going to do Performance Max. They're the best thing in the world, and we're going to get into Performance Max a little bit later. But you have these Google reps reaching out, and it's not necessarily about, hey, this is going to, help your campaign. This is, really, what is it more about, Daniel?
I honestly would take everything that they say with a grain of salt. I mean, person to person, you have some reps that are better than others, right? But I think a lot of times they speak in broad terms. I mean, to peel back the veil a little bit, I think people got to understand that relationship with Google, right? Like, Google is a business. They do have a roadmap, a strategy, a plan that they're trying to do internally. A lot of what the focus is of the reps is to get product adoption. So they're going to suggest a lot of times certain things. And if you pay attention, especially if you have multiple meetings with them, if you don't do something, they'll continue to hammer it in because they have incentives behind getting the product adoptions, right? So the better ones will actually look at your account and pull insightful things and suggest it to you. Other ones will just mention things from a top level. It's like, hey, you should try this, and not give much explanation as to why. Again, anybody that's worth their weight will definitely dig into the account a little bit, because if I suggested to you as an example to use an automated bid strategy, right? If you've used that in the past, that's somewhere in the change history. So anybody who's done their work would have looked at the account, would have looked at various different areas, especially change history, and noticed, some of the things you have done in the past. So if you hear them suggest something to you and it's like, oh, well, we tried that. A lot of times just that simple answer will stop them in their tracks. So I think a lot of that, you got to take a second, think about it. Why are they suggesting these things? A lot of times if you hit them with a rebuttal, they may not have an answer. And kind of the go-to response you're going to hear is, I'll get back to you on that. So that's another,
team, right?
Yeah, that's another kind of trigger.
Yep. So let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because I know, Daniel, you and I have had conversations around the alternative motives of product adoption specifically, right? And one of the things that you've always brought up on that side is that the reason that they're pushing for product adoption is because they want to make these products better. And it is very heavily focused in making these products better rather than not like what is right for your individual business. And like you said, don't get me wrong, there are some things that make a ton of sense. Like, okay, on the B2B side, like we should be linking HubSpot with Google Ads and doing some sort of value-based bidding. But a lot of times what they're doing is they're pushing things like Performance Max, because Performance Max is heavily automated, and almost everything is automated. And the more data that they slam into their system, the better it's going to be. And then another thing, just as far as like where Google's revenue is coming from as a company, is like it's heavily small businesses and people who, quite frankly, like don't know what they're doing when it comes to managing campaigns. So something like Performance Max is great for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And the better that they can make that product from people who do know what they're doing a little bit, the better and easier it's going to be to sell to new customers for Google. Not sure if you have anything you want to add there.
There is a couple of things I think to unpack. Like you said, I think a lot of it is built on good intentions, but what's that saying? The road to hell is built on good intentions or something like that. It's like they do it at a certain cost, right? Like you said, making the products better is ultimately the end goal. And the more data you can get to your algorithm for it to get smarter, the better it's going to be in the long run, right? But at what cost? I'm sure there's a lot of people, like you said, who implement certain things or try certain things and don't exactly know how to optimize the new features or exactly, what is it doing? You just did it based on a whim or something you heard, or, somebody gave you some advice and you took it. And now you're spending money utilizing a product that you don't fully understand. So in the best case scenario, it's going to work well for you. It's going to, increase results, whatever that may be, whatever KPI you're tracking, right? Maybe you're getting more conversions. But not always does it go that way. I may be interested to see what the percentages are for that, but for every positive, there's somebody who spent money on it and didn't get what they wanted, and now they got a sour taste in their mouth. So definitely, I think take it with a grain of salt. Try to understand and poke and prod as much as you can. Like get as much data and info you can from the Google reps. That's one thing that they have a lot of is like resources. So try to get as much of that information and digest it and try to understand it before taking advice and just implementing a new product because they give you a spazzy 6 seconds, like, oh, we're going to increase by this % based on some arbitrary customer that's nothing related to what you do, but they saw good results, so you'll see it too.
Hey, we're going to launch Broad Match because you'll get more reach. That was an email that I got recently, and I thought we were past that at this point, but I guess we're still there.
I can tell you.
Oh no, please.
No, I was just going to say the MO, and you can kind of see this if you had enough calls, right? I think a lot of the MO is you got to understand these reps are responsible for a large amount of individual accounts, right? So if I have to hit 100 plus accounts in a quarter, like that's almost impossible. So they try to group things together. So a lot of times they'll just look at recommendations tab and fire off a bunch of suggestions in there without going through pitfalls or the exact details. So
just so we can have this on the record about, and just so everybody knows Daniel's background a little bit, I know we didn't get into that, but Daniel comes from the Google side. He has experienced the rep world and has moved his way to the good side. So one kind of like, I guess, final question I have, because I feel like we're trashing the Google reps a lot and they are helpful. But one final question I have is, do you guys offer SEO help?
No.
Well, some people think so.
All right. Just getting that out of the way.
I think one thing as well to keep in mind, things go past just recommending or the recommendations. I think a lot of these gripes as well on this back end is also some of the things they are doing with keywords, right? You alluded, Daniel, to broad match. Hey, we're going to do, or no, excuse me, James, you said that. Switch to broad match for more reach, right? Well, no shit. Everyone in their bright mind knows that. It's like doing a brand awareness campaign on, Facebook. Of course, we're going to reach more people. That's the whole point of it, right? But ultimately, like right now, the thing that's, I think, annoying for us is these close variants or the phrase match almost acting like broad match now, where they're honestly moving away from some of the key elements that help things be more high intent or purpose driven. Jay, I know you have a lot of gripes around this. I think you and Daniel both are really good at keyword optimization, research, negative keyword lists, building these search term lists, whatever it may be. But I mean, at this point, how can you on a daily basis be as efficient as you used to with these new, I don't know, I guess you could call them buzzwords that they're using?
Right. And I want to preface this too, because you're right. We do kind of complain about this quite a bit. Bing is in far worse shape than Google Ads. when it comes to this keyword issue that we're seeing. Daniel's laughing, so like he knows exactly what I'm talking about. But what's going on is, yes, this close variant thing keeps popping up, and that's just telling us essentially how that search term related to our keyword. Everybody's familiar with the search terms report, or maybe not. What happens in the search terms report is, search term triggers your ad, and you can actually see which of the keywords was responsible for that search term being pulled in. It tells you whether it was an exact match or phrase match, broad match, whatever, right? The issue now is we're also seeing what's called close variant, even for exact match, and primarily for exact match, maybe only exact match. Again, feel free to check me on this stuff. I'm kind of going off the fly a little bit.
You're just inviting like the trolls to just shit on you.
I'm totally fine. Hey, listen, I'm totally fine with that. And I feel like going off of that, I feel like that's something that this industry needs more of. People need to realize like none of us know everything. So many people are like such airheads and think that they got it all figured out. It drives me crazy. Everyone should be open to criticism, in my opinion, when it comes to anything this technical. Like, yes, Google Ads is, this fun, smart machine tool, but a lot of it's just people in the background. We're all just people. Like, we've got to help each other out and support each other. So I totally invite the trolls. Rip me up. It's fine. Anyways, first, folks. Yeah, no, for real. Anyways, though, with the close variant stuff, what's going on is, yes, exact match is now behaving more like phrase, and this was a change that came about last year.
Yep.
And then phrase match is pulling in, like you just mentioned before, more variations basically, and it's behaving a little bit differently. There is actually a super helpful Google, article or support article that came out when the keywords actually changed that goes into detail in terms of what those changes were. I was shocked to see how informative it was, to be completely honest with you, because another thing I complain about is a lot of these support docs, help docs are not helpful at all. You've got to go open 2-3 more tabs before you actually get the answer you're looking for. But in short, I think something that you can do. So looking at this as a problem, something that you can start doing is keeping a really closer eye on your search terms report. Now, obviously, as advertisers, we're already doing this on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, maybe every day. It comes down to how much you're spending, whatever the campaign is. I could go into detail with that too. It's super important to keep an extra close eye on those search terms that are coming through, because these keywords are behaving differently than they have historically. And the biggest thing that we've been noticing is it's almost been a cumulative change, where last year we didn't see it, have too big of an impact right away. Now, really this year, we're seeing it happen more and more and more, where not only do we see close variant search terms increasing in volume, but also in terms of like what irrelevant terms are coming through phrase even is also increasing in volume. There's another piece to this, though. I guess you could call it like a second part when we're talking about search terms too. And this is a huge complaint that we have as well across the agency, just on the Google side, is other search terms and kind of our inability to see what other search terms are triggering our ads. And yeah, I mean, there's really, Google's reasoning behind that is total bullshit, to be frank with you. They basically say, if there's not enough volume behind these searches, that we don't need to see what these search terms are. That's really what it boils down to. Now, with that, we can't negate those search terms. We can't see performance per search terms or even add them. So, I mean, one of the bigger things that you could do to address this issue, if you have Bing running, because this issue is even bigger on the Bing front, look at those search terms in Bing. If you have your campaigns mirrored, like you're importing your search campaigns into Bing, see what the search term report looks like in Bing. A lot of the time, there's going to be a ton more variations when it comes to phrase match coming through Bing even, because it's almost casting an even broader net. Take that information, find some negative keywords, find some additions, and feed it back into Google. That way, you're kind of keeping things supporting each other rather than just like a one-way street with importing your campaigns, whether it's an auto import into Bing or you're manually doing it. If you look at Bing almost like a keyword research tool now, it's going to help you in the long run rather than just looking at Google and being like, oh, other search terms, I can't do anything. see if you can find that information in Google Analytics too. Sometimes you'll be able to see, what queries are coming through and generating traffic for you. So there's other things you can do to address the problem, but it is just kind of, this add it to the laundry list of these like minor things that we're spotting like left and right with Google lately.
Absolutely.
I kind of went down a rabbit hole there too, so I apologize.
No, that's good, because less transparency from Google, I think, is a common issue that I think we were boiled down into something that was nitty gritty right there, but it's something that we're seeing across the board. I mean, one of the next things that we're going to go into is cookies going away and what Google's solution is to that. And I don't know how many, I'll call them press conferences, have we all listened into and gotten like a complete non-answer from, because I think that there's a part where they don't know what they're doing. I'll say I kind of feel that, or they're just not confident enough to, it's almost like a political move. Like if they're not if it gets boiled down into a bunch of meaningless nonsense, right? Because they're not willing to have like a concrete stance or a concrete answer on something. So that lack of transparency on Google's side is huge. I mean, I promise we will bitch about Performance Max here, like at some point, but that's another thing there, like the lack of transparency when it comes to reporting, the lack of understanding of what's working and what's not working. But a big concern of mine moving forward is that we talked a lot about automation, right? Yeah. And I think we can go into some of the specific examples here in a second, but automation is heavily reliant on conversion-based data, right? I mean, you're setting up e-commerce tracking, conversion data, like trying to feed as much of like your business data into the system to make it work, right? Which when you have all of those touch points, it's fantastic. It's fantastic to do automation. Like there's nothing worse than manually adjusting bids because you have to, you're trying to cut the cost down here to do more somewhere else. Like bid, I'm so happy the days of manual bid adjustments. I don't want to say they're over, but I think they're over at this point. But we're also in a position where you're going to say you're going to get rid of cookies and tracking and all this stuff. How the hell are you supposed to automate campaigns with no conversion data?
Trust the system.
What is Google optimizing for at that point? Like your click-through rate, your clicks, your traffic, Google's revenue. Like what are they optimizing for? I'm having a huge issue right now with any e-commerce brand that we work with in Europe. Like when you implement the new OneTrust cookie system, you lose typically 30 to 50% of your revenue attribution because people have opt-in policies to cookies rather than opt-out. And when you put that choice in front of somebody, you're losing a lot of tracking. So your return on ad spend goes from 500% to 150% because there's less data to work with. And as we move into tools like Performance Max, where all you're giving them is like that ROAS target or whatever your revenue target is, it makes it really difficult because at least, let me put it this way, at least when we had search and Google Shopping and even display and YouTube, you were able to see, okay, what keywords are we targeting? Are they relevant? Right? You had that understanding. In shopping, you knew what search terms your products were showing for, and you were able to see, are they relevant? In display, you were able to see, where is my ad showing? Is it relevant? All of the common sense things that we do as marketers, like we had complete visibility into, versus now I really want to start bitching about Performance Max, us setting up some abstract parameters like, hey, here's our website, here's a video, here's a couple of display ads, and here are some keywords that we're interested in. Like, go out and find customers for us. And then we get that information back, and it's like, oh, well, you have 100% return on ad spend. It's like, okay, great. We're losing money. You're not reaching our ROAS target. And I have no idea why, because I can't break it. I mean, there are some things that a few things you can break down, but like, you can't break it down. Like, as an agency, right? Like, a big part of what we do is provide these insights to our clients so that we can effectively make business decisions. Now with Performance Max, I feel it's like, hey, we turned this on. It was a cool new thing they wanted us to push, and we have seen some success with it. And it's either you see success with it or you don't see success with it. And, you know, if the questions of like, why is this successful and why is it not successful, those answers are almost impossible to nail down.
When you look across the board and look whether you're on Reddit or LinkedIn and people are talking about Performance Max, it really is a love or hate it, like you're talking about. And what I have noticed, more of the people who love it are those on the I'll say this, on the e-commerce side of the world, and they're selling cheaper products. The minute it goes over, let's say $100 or anything like that, the e-commerce world isn't loving Performance Max. What sucks for the e-commerce world, though, is that shopping campaigns are pretty much being forced into Performance Max. And you okay, let's be honest here. You technically have a choice, but they're almost like pointing a gun to your head saying, hey, switch it now. Right. We experienced this internally with one of our clients as well, where our Google specialist on the account thought it had to change like within a week. And now it's kind of like, hey, it's going to happen, but is it going to happen? We don't know. We might make it happen. And so it was almost like they forced you into this Performance Max. And once they noticed probably a good portion of shopping campaigns transitioned into this, they're like, let's pull back. People didn't like us forcing them into this. And now it's kind of like a TBD, but it's going to happen at any time we want. But we're not going to tell you when because we're too scared to get backlash. And that's really kind of the cycle with everything Google does. Again, you know, I really love Daniel's perception and his perspective on Performance Max campaigns. Daniel and I work closely together on quite a few accounts here. And sometimes it becomes a joke of just, let's just launch Performance Max, let Google do the rest. You know, go have a nice little lunch break or something. You know what I mean? And that's what it's turned into. It's almost, frankly, a meme in our agency whenever there's a new account. You know, I was joking about this yesterday when we were talking about a new account that might come on board. Let's just do Performance Max. It'll work well. So Daniel, I would love you to share your thoughts on Performance Max. And I would love as well, are there things that are good about Performance Max? Let's try and give both sides of the coin.
I haven't yet found exactly what that is. Like you said, there's a lot of, I think, love-hate. People who are using it, are seeing success, really love it. But I think you have to dig in a little bit deeper as to why that is, right? Is it the process is so easy for them that they like that set it and forget it mentality, especially if it's kind of like you mentioned e-commerce companies, right? Or maybe you have somebody internally who's not as savvy with Google Ads. So therefore setting that up seems like, you know, once I set it and it gets going and it's working well, like, eureka, we're good. You know, we can move on and focus on something else. But anybody else who has, I think, a little bit more tact and is a little bit more familiar with the platform and used to seeing a level of insights, like once you get in there and realize what it's presenting to you, you're like, what the hell? Like, I don't know what's, like James mentioned, Zach mentioned already a couple of times too, you don't know what the hell is working and what's not. And that's usually the follow-up question you get anytime you show a client something. It's like, hey, here's performance for the month. And the next usually question, whether it's good or bad, it's like, all right, why is that good or why is it bad? And with Performance Max, you just throw your hands in the air and say, I don't know. You know, you don't really have much to go on. And even digging into other layers of the account, right? Going into reports and try to create a custom report to pull out certain stuff, you don't have that ability. And it's something we've seen also in other areas, like even responsive search ads as an example. Once you get enough impressions, you can start to get those gradings of, you know, best, good, you know, worst, but there's nothing else beyond that. You can't see which combinations were put together and how they performed. It's really tough to say, what to do with that information. And with Performance Max, it's even a level beyond that now. And you just throw your hands in the air. I think one thing to also touch on what James was talking about earlier is you can't actually see those things, but you can't negate things either. Like you can't add negatives to it in certain areas to omit serving, for specific keywords or serving in specific, I don't even think locations at this point, but I know there's a lot of limitations around, why levers you can pull, switches you can adjust. But I think there's a deeper conversation there about, the why behind a lot of it, and that not being totally shared with users of Google Ads. I think there was another thing that James said that I kind of wanted to backtrack to is like, what is the hesitation to give that extra layer of insight, right? Like, why are they taking those levels of insight away? There's not, I've never heard a reason. I don't know if anybody else has, as a reason why you can't see anything. It's kind of just like, trust us and let us take the wheel. It's like, okay, I don't mind doing that if you can at the very least, explain to me why you took it away or why I can't make adjustments.
Absolutely. I think you went into a good point, bringing up a lot of similarities to that of responsive. I would say, I don't know how many months it's been, probably the last couple months. They removed expanded text ads, right? And we had to, any newly created ads needed to be responsive search ads. You can still have expanded text ads, but you can't really do anything with them. Essentially, they're literally just waiting there to die because you can't even edit them. And so they put some things in place to make responsive search ads act like expanded text ads by the pinning aspect, different things like that. But again, it's almost trusting the system that is truly going to populate the way it is. And if there are specific, legalities behind a client and how messaging has to be portrayed, that brings a big issue. James, we recently ran into an issue with this where we're hoping the pins work. But again, like you alluded to, we can't go in and verify every ad that's showing is showing in this specific order. Right? We're just trusting that the system is going to listen to us exactly how we want it to, which is a little scary on that front.
I think also all of this automation makes things difficult from a strategy perspective. And we just went into I think that there's an audience targeting strategy problem with Performance Max, and then there's a messaging problem when it comes to some of the new automated ad units that are out there. First, I want to go to the Performance Max piece, because one of the things that we talk a lot about in the B2B space is demand capture activities and demand generation activities. And what Performance Max is doing is trying to like blend these activities together all in one single campaign, where I'm going to be honest, like Google has made its money off of demand capture. Like somebody is searching for a very specific thing. There's clearly already demand for it. I'm looking for project management software pricing on some for different competitors, whatever the search is, like it's very specific and brands can capture the demand that's already out there. Right. And then that's the easy part. That is the easy part of marketing, because I mean, it's capturing demand that already exists. The hard part about marketing is messaging, brand positioning, the why behind anything. Like, why is somebody going to work with your brand versus somebody else's? Why does like product education? Again, we do a lot in the B2B space. Like, people don't know that a solution to their problem exists in a lot of cases unless you have some sort of education. Like, there's a lot of SaaS companies coming out right now that are alternatives to third-party cookies, right? And I feel like there's a lot of education that needs to take place before somebody decides that they want to move to a first-party cookie tracking solution. Like, there's a lot of education that takes place. And when you're trying to blend your demand capture activities and your demand gen activities all in one single campaign, it's impossible to see what works. Because at the same time, like budget wise too, like it costs a lot more to educate and create demand for a product than it does to just capture the demand for it, right? So like the budget, you don't even know, like when you run a Performance Max campaign, you don't even know what that split is. Like, oh, hey, like we want to do a lot of education on like how-to terms on like YouTube, right? Like that would be a solid demand gen strategy. And if you want to put a lot of money into that strategically, you have no control. Yeah. It's all under one umbrella.
Later on too, we're going to get into like kind of, we have all these gripes, and this is typically how James and I go about these podcasts, right? We gripe for a while, and then we come up with resolutions or our opinions of where things should go. And we're absolutely going to do that. I have some notes on Performance Max that I think could help improve it in the short term. And then I also know, the rest of this team here has an idea as well. We've been talking, again, a lot of this automation. And I think one of the biggest things that I am starting to have a frustration of is, and we've been alluding to it already, the responsive aspect that Google is going with. It does lead into this conversation of Performance Max to a point. Right now, we can still manually upload display ads. You can still have control of that, set your ad groups that way. But how long is that going to last, right? They made a pretty quick, swift change with expanded text ads to responsive search. Responsive display is an option. So how much longer are we going to have this control on the display front? And really what it's coming down to, where I'm going with this, is you almost have pretty soon we're going to have no control over the front-facing value for our clients, their perception, unless we all upload one asset, which isn't allowed in responsive. You have to have multiple assets, so you can't even control on that front. So, the other aspects here, and you were alluding to this early on when we were talking about Google support agents, or email support, whatever you want to call them, is really the lack of accountability. And Jay, I think this is one that you allude to a lot, and I think you mentioned it slightly. We'll get back to our team, like Daniel's saying, that's probably their number one go-to. Well, how many times do you actually hear back from them?
Right. And I mean, I could go into some serious issues I've had in the past, but again, I don't want to, say anything too nasty, because I know everybody's just doing their job. Like I said
100%.
before, at the end of the day, So what can you do to an extent? But really, it kind of goes back to like what Daniel was saying before, but spend 10 minutes. Like, you have 100 accounts assigned to you, but spend 10 minutes and look at the website in the account. You just check out the website.
Well, Daniel, is there even a team that they can actually go to with these questions? Like, does that team that they allude to even exist?
There's a caveat, I would say. A lot of my experience when I was there was during COVID, so that was a little bit tougher of a situation. Sure. But a lot of the teams are siloed, right? So communication is kind of kept internally between who's working around you in your department. I know for us, the best thing we could have done for you with any kind of support was to ask somebody higher up or ask somebody on your team with a little bit more experience. Beyond that, it was submitting a ticket on your behalf and hoping that it gets sent to the right person and that person reaches out to you with a solution.
Right.
Oftentimes we would get replies to our own submitted tickets, and we would have to relay that information to our clients. So the support side definitely is lacking from what it was prior, but there is a few options that they did have at their disposal, but it wasn't much, to be honest.
I feel like support as we knew it died with the pandemic. We used to be able to call reps all the time. We'd give them your account ID. We'd basically verify, their request to access the account. They'd walk you through one-on-one what the issue is, explain things in detail. Now, I tried calling Google last week. I was on hold for 15 minutes. I gave up.
I'm impressed you called.
Well, it was the reason I did it was I sent 3 emails to our rep at the time for an account. An account was down for a verification issue, which I know tons of people had issues with the verification process this, late spring, early summer. And he sent us one response. Oh, I've escalated this. That's the keyword I was going to say before when you were saying something, Daniel. They say they'll escalate our ticket or whatever if we submit one. I've escalated this. Stay tuned for an update from whatever other department he reached out to. Gave him a week, got nothing. Sent another email. Didn't hear anything for 3 days. Sent another email. Where eventually I'm just like, okay, I've got to figure this out. Tried calling, was on hold, gave up, and just kind of went through that process I talked about before, where you have to open up one support doc and then open up 3, 4 more until you figure out what you need to figure out, and just kind of solve it on your own when you can. Thankfully, we were able to do that, but the whole process would have been a lot faster if we just had that support line right off the bat.
Absolutely. And I think, James, I think you've spoken about this as well. And you said it as well, James, COVID didn't just affect, restaurant industry. It affected everything all the way down to the support we receive. And it's almost now, and very much like Daniel was talking about, they're almost more sales for Google adoption, less than they are support. They come across in their emails as, hey, I'm going to be supporting you on this account. I'm going to be in charge of this account. Let's get on a call and talk about X, Y, or Z, right? Some recommendations I have. But again, it's more of they are selling these adoption products. In this case, probably, and I haven't seen a Google email in a little bit. I'm sure they go to my spam now. They're selling Performance Max or Add More Responsive or something like that. I'm just going to assume. But at the end of the day, when you ask them, okay, why? What led you to this decision on my account? You either don't get an answer, or it's some sort of, well, it'll increase your quality score of the account, right? Quality score this, quality score that. And so it kind of goes back to an overarching, just trust the algorithm, trust the system, It's very scripted answers. People talk about that, especially in like telemarketing, right? You have a binder, like flip to page 3 if they answer this way. It's like, do they have that as well in a Google Doc? You know what I mean? You get the same answers from every rep that you get, and you get a new rep every quarter, I feel like. Good or bad, some of them, like you said, Daniel, have great insight. They can actually be helpful. It's typically ones who have either been on the agency side or have taken the 10 minutes just to dive into figuring out why this is, right? And we don't expect them to be perfect, but when you represent Google and there's an issue with Google, I'd hope you could at least get something done. So
I think the positioning is important. Like you were saying,
yeah.
Zach, the way they position themselves when they reach out in communications, it's like, I'm representing all of Google on Google's behalf to talk to you about this client, or to talk to you about your account, excuse me. But yeah, it's kind of a false representation when you think about it in those terms, because it's like, you really only want to talk about, what's beneficial to you, not necessarily what all the issues that I may be having. And when I do present something to you, you have nothing for me to help resolve that. So we'll definitely take that with a grain of salt to anybody who talks to a rep, like understand the dynamics of the relationship and be assertive, right? And kind of set some boundaries and stuff up front. Definitely, I would be a little bit cautious, but like you said, they do add value, and they do have access to a lot of good information. But always challenge certain things, ask questions, and dig a little bit deeper. Like, don't just take stuff at face value. Like, I've literally had drug out fight conversations and just constant rebuttal. And I've had really good conversations that way. But a lot of times, what I've noticed being on the other side now is some of the reps that we have and some of the clients we deal with, whenever we get into a call, like, nobody's really asking questions about what they're suggesting. A lot of what they're suggesting is very top level also, right? They don't go into specifics. They just say things in broad terms. And it's not very helpful. Like, I know the playbook when I hear it and I'm just listening to it. James knows, because I'm constantly pinging him back and forth whenever we're in a meeting with the rep about certain things. So
yes, it's a big help for me. That's for sure. But I just wanted to add something to because I think a big part of it is on us too. The history that we have with the Google reps is, like Jay said, we used to be able to call and get technical support. I don't think much has changed with the actual Google reps themselves and like their goal, like your agency rep that looks at your accounts. I think they always kind of have done the same thing. I do not think they're quite as good as what they used to be, but they never could help with like technical support. Like, the problem as far as like what that I see with COVID is like, we can't just call the 800 number anymore and say, hey, our billing has an issue for XYZ reason. Can you help me sort that out? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's the part that's like frustrating, is sometimes like, because there is always some sort of like technical nuance thing that we've been trying to figure out for a while, that we're like, oh, hey, fine, like let's bring this to our Google rep. Maybe they can help escalate or help do whatever. And they can't. And then the 800 number, doesn't, I don't know how that works now, but it ain't very good.
Absolutely. And I think one thing as well, a lot of these gripes, it's not just a Google thing. We're starting to see a lot of these things across the board. Facebook as well. You used to be able to reach out to Meta, get really good help. Now, again, it's, hey, let me submit this to my team. You'll hear back in 24 to 48 hours. I'll give Meta this. I don't know if I've ever been left hanging. I almost always have gotten an answer back on some level. LinkedIn, I've personally never reached out to, and Microsoft as well, I've never reached out to for help. And I'm sure they have some sort of setup the same. I think the biggest issue with Bing, and that I've noticed, is very similar to what we were talking about early on, is they're automatically opting you into things as well. And one of them recently was opting them into an audience network. And you had to go pretty deep in the settings to find that one, probably 4 or 5 clicks deep to be able to turn that off. And it was just automatically turned on. You were automatically opted into it. And again, there's scenarios where this actually is a pretty big deal of just making this happen. And so
it's another strategy thing.
Yeah.
Like, you're opting a demand capture campaign into a demand creation campaign, but using demand capture messaging. Like, it's just like not, it won't work. Right. Oh, hey, let's take our bottom of the funnel messaging that's designed around our branded search keywords and then just opt it into like an audience network. Like,
yeah,
I don't know about that.
Well, I think we've done a really good job of expressing our feelings, getting it out there, this negative energy out. Right now, we're ready to find solutions and change the world for Google and make their lives so much easier. And they're going to listen to us because they're probably our number one listener on this podcast, which is amazing to think about.
That's actually TikTok. I don't know if you've opted into those settings, but TikTok is your number one listener for everything.
There we go. Well, that's a whole nother we can talk about that one later. I think where we should get started is because I think this affects a lot more than just Google, but it's cookies, the conversation around cookies. And so I think I would love to get into this conversation. James and I have talked about this a little bit on other podcasts. In some level, Jay, Daniel, I'd love your perspective here. How is our agency improving this? How are we tackling this? And likewise, what are some suggestions we have for those out there to combat this cookie issue in the world?
Not all at one time,
I was
Jay.
to say, nervous Nelly's over here. Dang. No, you're good, Jay.
I think the interesting thing about that whole question in general, right, isn't that part of the unique selling position or selling proposition of Google, is that tracking capability to verify, actions are being taken, right? So when you kind of remove that, how valuable is the platform at the end of the day? Yep. Now you have to look for a third-party solution to confirm that actions are actually taking place. So I think it kind of weakens the position on that. I know when I was there, that whole thing came up, right? That's when the iOS announcement came out. And we were talking about it internally, and there was a bunch of like scrambles as far as like their presented solution, which at the time sounded convoluted, and to this day, to me, still sounds convoluted.
Flocking and modeling.
Not entirely sure what's going on, but I think a lot of it was trying to get ahead of everything that was going on, because I think a lot of stuff was in flux. The one answer that I think everybody has heard a million times, but first party data to me is probably going to be the most reliant, but it's kind of like, that's a little bit tricky as well, because it's kind of an after actions have been taken, right? It's not necessarily an afterthought. That's not the appropriate word for it, but it's kind of like retroactively having to go back in and import information after things have already happened. So that creates a lag, right? Especially in your like reporting and stuff. And also another task that has to be done, like how frequently are you going in, taking that information and re-adding it back into the platform. But I would say first party is definitely going to be the most reliant. I know James was talking about some other stuff in some meetings we had internally. So there are other solutions. I'm not sure, James, if you want to talk about some of the stuff. I know we're still kind of researching some of it, but
yeah, I mean, there's
what
a lot.
I was hearing.
There's a lot. Let me just put it out there. There's like a lot of alternatives out there. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them are as good as like a third-party cookie solution. Like it's like it was just very easy to say like, hey, this person saw this ad, completed this action, and then we saw them, you know, in our Salesforce or whatever it may be. But it is something that we've talked about before on this podcast. There are a lot of different tracking solutions, and really what we need to do is figure out what is best for each individual business model, because we come from this world of Google Analytics being the be all end all. I feel like everybody, except for maybe some of like the newer, younger marketing generation, I feel like everyone who's been in this for at least, 5 to 10 years at this point, like kind of grew up on Google Analytics. Google Analytics was a thing. You needed to have everybody certified in it. You needed to have do it. And there was a lot of like advancements that happened in Google Analytics. And now with, iOS and the whole cookie thing, it's nowhere near as reliable as it used to be. But like you said, Daniel, that was their unique selling point. Google's going to struggle with that. But moving forward, like we have to move away from Google, honestly. Like we should always still have conversion tracking set up in Google Ads, conversion tracking set up in Google Analytics. It's good, it's useful information, but that is not how we are measuring the ROI on our campaigns anymore. That is just additional data points that we're feeding into our campaigns that we can use to help make them better. And I think all of these different tools are going to have a similar functionality. It's just going to come at it from a different angle. So Google Ads, Google Analytics is really good for like granular optimizations using the conversion data you have, because you will have some insight into what's working and what's not working. But big thing that's going to come back is like modeling. I mean, Google says that, they're going to basically, with cookies going away, model for the rest of the data. That's what they're doing. But that's like, modeling is actually an old school approach where you're saying like media mix modeling tools, I think is going to be a big thing that comes back, where you're essentially plugging in mapping spend to revenue, spend across these channels to put revenue. And as you move that spend around, how does that affect the financial model that you're working on? Now that's like complex, involves like a data modeling team. A lot of like small marketing teams are not going to be able to do that. A lot of small marketing spend companies are never going to be able to do that, because you need statistically significant data to model. So again, it's something that we can look at, something that there's going to be issues with.
Absolutely. First
party cookies. I'm sorry, I'm going through the whole litany here, but like first party cookies is going to be a thing that everybody has to focus on. Like you said, using first party data, there's like a lot of server side tracking tools out there right now that essentially doing the same thing that third party cookies do, except for the brand is hosting that data rather than the third party Google provider of the world, right? So like now you host and own that data. So there are like some pros and cons that come with that. Like you can set that cookie for however the fuck long you want, or you can collect more data over a longer period of time. Again, problem with that right now is nobody has that in place. You want to put that in place, it's going to be a long time until you're able to, like you said, Daniel, after the fact, use and interpret those results.
What's nice too is, so we actually, I want to say it was even last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we actually did a podcast on various technologies, things we recommend, and we go into attribution technology. And so I recommend listening to that podcast if you really want to get deeper into it. As stated in every other podcast, do not hesitate to reach out to James or I if you have more questions. we'd love to be a resource for you on this. Attribution is not easy, especially in a world where cookies are seemingly going away, and you're losing control. And if you're not watching the video podcast, I just used air quotes, losing control of your cookies and your data. So it's a topic we've talked about a lot because it is really important. You'll hear attribution come up in probably every podcast so far that we've talked about. Maybe the least amount was in our social one, but I don't know if that's even true. So attribution is very important. It's very top of mind, and it's a very serious topic internally that we're trying to combat and find the right solution for our clients as well. I want to move to Performance Max. And again, trying to be on the optimistic side of Performance Max, in my opinion, of how you can look at it and where Performance Max could go. An idea that I've had, and I've even, I don't know if it does anything, I submitted this and they're like, give us a review type thing or give us your feedback on Performance Max. Giving it to the level of almost display and being able to look at the placements. Being able to, maybe you can't necessarily control everything, but at least giving an idea of, hey, this piece of creative was shown on this, let's say Candy Crush, and it brought you a conversion. One, I might have questions for a lot of our clients of why that did well, but at the end of the day, having at least an insight of the placements, that would be a first step. Even if we can't necessarily go in and fully fine-tune the placements or fully fine-tune what creative goes where, having at least that understanding and the insight of these 5 conversions I got on Performance Max, where did they specifically come from? So we can optimize around that, right? Performance Max, again, to reiterate, you've got search, you've got text portions of it. You've got your logo, you've got your imagery, you've got your videos. It's essentially every type of Google ad out there all into one. Right. So having an idea of, was it the video that did well? Was it the image that did well? Or was it the search that did well? Right. That at least gives you an idea of maybe we should run a very specific YouTube campaign or utilize these videos on a social format to take us to the next level. And I think that is kind of the next step that Performance Max has to move down the road of, or it's not going to be adopted very well, in my opinion.
I know they did take some feedback. I remember reading an article not too long ago that they were adding a little bit more visibility. I don't know if that's quite made its way into the actual product yet. Again, we're not running it, or I should say I'm not running Performance Max on any of the clients I'm working on specifically. I can take a look at the internal accounts that we are running it on to see if they have implemented it, but I know they had taken some feedback that was given by a lot of users and have started to implement some of the visibility on performance, but it's, again, still nowhere near the level of a standard, campaign you can run for search or display.
Absolutely.
But I'm kind of at a wait and see personally for it. I'm not opposed to utilizing the new tools and automation. Like, I like aspects about RSA and RDA, but Performance Max, like, I'm still gonna hold on for a while before I suggest using that to anybody, to be honest.
I think the biggest thing, and something James and I talk about a lot, is don't be afraid to innovate, don't be afraid to test, don't be afraid to experiment. And this is one of those tools that you're hearing all this gripe out there about, right? I mean, you heard it from even us of why we don't actively pursue Performance Max. But on some level, you have to experiment that for yourself. But if you set realistic expectations of what is lacking and what you could get out of this or what you won't get out of this, you might go into this and actually be surprised. There are people finding success with Performance Max, and that shouldn't be ignored. On some level, Performance Max is working for someone, right? On some level, some team at Google thought of Performance Max, did a beta or alpha test with a select industry or select agencies, and they probably found great results. Now, are we ever going to see those insights of what led them to this road? No, right? They're never going to release that, at least as far as I'm aware, they won't release it. But if you go into an experiment or a test and utilize Performance Max like you would any other test, setting realistic expectations, whether internally or with your client, of saying, hey, we're going to run this test for, let's just try it for 2 weeks, see if we get anything. If not, we'll turn it off. Maybe your spend is low and you're getting great conversions. Maybe this is a campaign that actually turns your whole atmosphere, omni-channel approach around, right? It's just all about having the expectations behind it. Over time, it's going to have to get better, like I said, or it will never be truly adopted and will be just another failed idea from Google. There's tons of those. Google is not afraid to innovate, not afraid to test the waters. This is another one of those things. They're testing the waters, they're innovating, seeing what they can do more with their algorithm and AI and NLP products. So I think that's the biggest thing with Performance Max is it's always, I think in some level as marketers, we have to be open to, I don't know, the future, if you want to say. And if you look at anything, even outside of marketing and advertising, AI and algorithms are on the very forefront of any sort of technology. To be honest with you, I mean, even look at things like when buying a home or buying a car, there's quizzes that you can do. And it's utilizing information and algorithm based on your personality types of what's going to work best on some level. It's very similar. They're going to show you a house that matches your profile, and that's what Performance Max is supposed to be doing. You as a customer searching, you respond to certain things a certain way, and that's what Google's going to do for this business. Show that person what exactly they're looking for. Theoretically, right? We don't have insight if that's actually what's happening, but theoretically, that's how it's supposed to work. So
I think that plays into, too, though, how, last year we were pushed. I'm going back to the cookie discussion before a little bit, since you alluded to targeting a bit.
Yeah.
How, we were told about Flock last year. We basically, originally we thought we were going to get some form of a beta either last fall or early this year. They ended up killing it, which we found out, I think, tail end of last year, beginning of this year. And now they're using what's called Topics API. Now, there's a theory out there that they didn't actually kill Flock. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but some people think that they just reskinned it. It's still
the
Flock.
Joe Rogan podcast?
But no. But people think that it's still Flock, but because of the blowback they got, they just named it something else, essentially. And it's still functioning the same way. They're just calling out different features of Flock and relating it back to, like, obviously Topics. We're all familiar with that. They're relating it now back to Topics and this Topics API push. So to your point before, like, yes, they're getting your ads in front of people who are supposed to be interested in them, but do we actually know how that's going to be working in the future? Not yet. It's still something we're kind of waiting on. I think Topics API is in beta right now. There's not a whole lot of information on it yet. I think it just rolled out again more recently in the past couple of months,
Or they'll scrap it here in a couple months too.
Maybe they'll change the name. Maybe it'll change the name again. I don't know.
It's so interesting that with this, like, the position that they've taken on it, because having experience with other programmatic platforms, like, there are solutions. There are solutions to the problems that they have. Like, identity mapping solutions is huge right now for every programmatic platform. Like, the cookieless solutions to still do retargeting versus, like, Google basically trying to say, we're not really going to do retargeting. We're going to do kind of like a display retargeting hybrid. Like, I don't know. It's very, very funky there.
It's awesome. I think a good place to go and kind of slowly come to a close on our Google gripe conversation is, what does the future look like? Jay, in your opinion, as a marketer, what does the future look like in everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, I say this a lot. I'd say step one is be super conservative with your experiments. We talked about it a lot today, but it's important to test new things, obviously. If something new is launched, you think it's going to help you out on a performance standpoint, awareness, whatever it is that you're trying to get after. Test it out, see if it works. Just be conservative with how much budget you're placing behind these experiments. Have realistic expectations out of it. Don't put more into it than you can afford, whether that's from a financial standpoint or otherwise. You can decide that on your own. But for the time being, I'd say retain as much control as you can. We talked about it with responsive ads. You can pin things. You talked about that in headlines. There's things you can do with testing. Don't just max out all the fields in these ads for the sake of it. Pin your headlines to certain positions. If you're running an RDA, segment RDAs by image type, format, something. Make it, try and retain a little bit of control. That way we're not stuck with these worded, I guess, answers to what's working better than something else, not best, worst, average. If you can actually retain a little bit of control with these responsive or automated formats and settings, you can still hang on to some of those important KPIs that we need in the short term, while slowly testing out some of the automated things that they're pushing. So that's Absolutely. Kind of where I think we're at now, and how we can slowly start to ramp things up and adopt some of these new products or features that they're pushing on us. And again, in kind of a conservative fashion versus just saying, yeah, sure, let's do it. Why not? So.
Absolutely. What about you, Daniel? What do you think kind of the future looks like, whether from a Google use standpoint or just marketing and digital marketing in general? Because a lot of these topics and things that we've talked about aren't just specific to Google. They're just really prevalent in Google.
Yeah, it's a tough question, I would say. Like, we were talking about a few things. You mentioned Joe Rogan, like conspiracy a little bit, just going off of that tip. Like, you got to imagine from a lot of the conversations and the way I've heard certain things phrased is like, there can use a lot of the power that they're using to advertise and other things. To me, it sounds like it's more of a test of trying to figure out human behavior, right? Because you were talking about earlier with the responsive capabilities of certain things, like trying to show people, the system's trying to predict when you're in the mood to make a decision or an action, right? Whether that's a purchase is probably the easiest thing to say. So it's like, hey, give us all these assets and we can show you an ad when we think you're going to be in the mood to make a purchase based on all the other behaviors that we're tracking across the board, all their products and everything. One thing I'd say is just keep in mind that it's a tool, right? For whatever we're doing, for the marketing, for whatever you're doing with your business, like Google Ads is just a tool at the end of the day. So definitely treat it as such. Try to figure out creative ways to utilize what is available in there to help you achieve any goals that you have. Another thing I would say too is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is don't have it be your only omni-channel that you're using. Like, test every other platform that's out there. Try to retain as much control as possible, because what happens is if you skew your strategy and whatever money you're spending on marketing to one platform, whenever that platform makes changes, like, you have to adopt, because your business is going to be drastically affected by those changes, right? I've seen that a lot with certain businesses that rely on Amazon, right? They can change their policy on how they're packing, something. They no longer want plastic bags. Now that affects your whole business down to supply chain issues, right? Now you have to go back to your factories and, hey, remove all these plastic bags. And just because that's where most of your business comes from, because you put all your eggs in one basket, now it's greatly affected you in all these other areas. So I'll say that also when it comes to utilizing any kind of marketing platform is don't put all your eggs in one basket and try to retain as much control as possible. As far as the future, I mean, it's going to be automation or bust. I feel like they're going to strong arm you at some point to utilize what they want the way they want it to. Hopefully we have enough pushback to be able to get more information and insights that we would need for us and, as marketers to help do our jobs effectively. But again, hopefully it just doesn't come to a point where we have no say, right? Like, we have no input as far as the products and how they function. So
absolutely. James, I definitely want to get your opinion here too, but we kind of alluded to this in our previous podcast where we talked about the over-reliance on technology, especially in our industry. And I think this is a great example. And Daniel, you were getting to this point as well, is you can never replace the human side of marketing. Humans sell to humans, right? Most people, I mean, there's definitely a subset that don't. They understand when something is worded weird or looks off in an image, right? And there's just little things that can happen with automation or AI or whatever it is that could make something that doesn't read natural. Now, Google has NLP built in their algorithm, which I've said this a couple times. It's natural language processing. It's supposed to make it where it's conversational, very much like how we speak now. It's built into a lot of things, specifically, you know, like TV remotes. NLP is on the in the process of most things. Well, it's not perfect. No one can speak like a human except a human. Even the most intelligent robots that you see on TikTok going live, communicating with people in chat, right? It still messes up. I don't personally watch those. I've just seen videos of weird things. But it's the truth. You can't replace the human side of marketing. And that's something that I personally have a worry of is Google going to replace the human side of marketing inside of their platform? So, James, like I said, I would love to get your opinion. What is your insight into potentially what the future kind of looks like here?
Yeah, I mean, technology is going to evolve and change continuously.
Yep.
We are in a situation right now where we're definitely at like a tipping point of like, we're unsure what the technology is going to look like in the future when it comes to targeting, tracking, attribution, all of those things. But it is going to get better, and we are going to be able to figure out those things at some point. But I do think that this gives us the opportunity to go back to being marketers and not being as reliant on technology. I think a major shift that's happened in the last, again, 5 to 10 years is they've taken marketers and they've turned us into like tech people, right? You know, how many, like, from tracking and needing a developer to figure out what's wrong with this issue, what's wrong with that issue, and, you know, us investigating different tracking issues for XYZ, like, that's not marketing at the end of the day. That's just like us trying to prove the results of marketing. Marketing is doing customer research, figuring out who our customers are, where they are, and what do they want to hear that's going to effectively make a buying decision. And as long as we're able to continue that process, then things are going to be successful. Like, marketing back in the day was serving massive television ads to a specific audience. Like, we have way more tools at our disposal now to ensure that we are hitting the right people with the right messaging at the right time. And I think just if we focus on doing exactly just that, marketing campaigns will be successful. Like, we can still measure revenue. We still know how much money we're making. We know if we're getting new customers, and it's just focusing more on that and less on the technical BS that we've kind of forced ourselves to deal with, because that's the frustrating part. And in reality, it's not what we signed up to do as marketers.
Absolutely. I've said this for a while, and I think I've even, you know, Daniel, maybe you've heard me say this on calls with clients, is as marketers, almost everything is theoretical. In some aspect, when agencies are selling to businesses, they'll say, you know, maybe they'll say they have their secret sauce or a proprietary way of doing this. But really, it's just theories around becoming the best at using a channel or putting your brand out there and understanding the data that's being given to you and how we're going to use it. And I think that's something that is important to remember, is that there's no one way to do things. And that's why we tout innovation is very important, especially now more than ever, is because there's so many ways to do things inside of one channel. Now you talk about an omni-channel approach and how you could connect Facebook to Google, to TikTok, to Snapchat, to Reddit, to CTV programmatic, to being a sponsor of this podcast. How does it all work together, right? At the end of the day, there's so many paths that you can go down. How people respond to your brand is going to be different everywhere you go. And so being sure that you are staying on top of the channels and understanding the direction they're going is key. With Google, yeah, sometimes it's really hard to understand why they're doing things. It's really hard to potentially understand why they've decided to cut something out or why they're making this addition. But being able to go in, utilize it, look at the data in front of you and say, okay, maybe this is how I can use it in the future, or this is absolute crap, I'm never going to use it again, right? Those are decisions that can be made once you've truly utilized it. And I think that's something important here. You know, all three of us, I think, or all four of us, excuse me, have really said pretty much all the same thing of the future is unclear, but what is clear is the reliancy on algorithms, AI, and tech, and really how we're going to adapt to those, overcome them, and try and keep control. And I don't know if there's a perfect answer. I think we've all shared some ideas. Previous podcasts, we've also talked about different ideas. We've had other guests on that have shared ideas. And you'll notice not every answer is ever the same. Even with us four working closely together day in and day out, we all have different ideas. And I think that's the beauty of marketing. And that's why you can't replace that human side. So long story short, I think this has been a really good conversation around Google. I think there's a lot more that we could even dig into, and maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime once, maybe come 2023 or something, after we have more information or different changes they've made. Maybe we'll do Google channel updates and other channel talks like this. I'd love to do this more because I think it's insightful to get this information. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Daniel, Jay, thanks for being on here as well, dealing with James and I. We'll see you all next time, and thanks for being an avid listener.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday. In the meantime, keep up with the show by following James and Zach on social media. Links are in the show notes.